great synagogue. I'd like to welcome you all. Generally, the president of the synagogue, Asher Shapiro, does this introduction. Unfortunately, there's illness and his family is unable to be here tonight. My name is Eddie Abramson, and it's a great honor to be here to introduce Rabbi Riskin. Chayav Adam l'hakbil et b'nei rabo l'regel. A person is required to meet and become involved with his Rabbi on the Chagim. I believe that for the last many, many years, we've all been Mekayem that mitzvah in a certain sense. Here on Motzei Shabbat Shuvah and Motzei Shabbat HaGadol. And in a very, very deep way, Rabbi Riskin is our Chagim Rabbi, all of us. Rabbi Riskin has been my personal rabbi for over 50 years. But I think everyone that has heard him, Doresh, on Pesach and Yamim Noraim, has become his Talmid in a very, very profound way. Because perhaps the reason that one is required to greet one's Rebbe on the Regel is because it's really only through one's Rebbe that one can understand the real depth of what the Chagim mean to us. I have to personally thank Rabbi Riskin after all these years, and on behalf of all of us, to thank him for giving us that depth and those nuances and that spirituality and that hitlavut and many, many other things regarding Chag HaPesach and the Yamim Noraim. It's my profound pleasure to present to you Rabbi Riskin.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Abramson. Morai Rabotai. The lecture this evening is first of all in memory of my beloved parents, who always came every year, and I especially miss them on the evenings of Shabbat Shuvah and Shabbat HaGadol. My father, my teacher, Tzvi Hirsch ben Shmuel Belea. My mother, my teacher, Ruth Bat Chaim B'Chayim. I also feel the necessity of giving a special tribute, and in a sense dedicating the talk to Yehuda Avner, Zichrono Livracha. Proud Jewish leader, a prince in Israel who reached the highest echelons of an Israeli and world platform, a lover of Torah who truly understood the Jewish mission in the world, an individual whose loss world Jewry and world humanity will truly feel. No one on a personal level encouraged me more in all of my endeavors, sagaciously and lovingly. I will miss him. Am Yisrael will miss him. The world will miss him. The topic I'm going to speak on this evening is a very difficult one. I'm going to try to be as clear as I can. It is really the question of the importance of conversion in our generation, like never before. Who is really a Jew? Esther, the Jew from birth, versus Ruth, the Jewish proselyte from choice. Within that context, I must say a few words about Persia then and Iran and ISIS now, and religious conversion or national conversion. What's the difference? And what do we need today? There is a subtext to what I am saying. A subtext which is the reason that I chose this topic this evening. The people of Israel worldwide is faced with two immense difficulties. Existential problems. The first is external. Islamic extremism, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas. And the one name that encompasses all of the above, Iran. Whether the President of the United States understands it or not. I'm very proud that the Prime Minister of Israel understands it. And it's a worldwide problem. We saw it in France. It's throughout Europe. It's also in the Middle East. And we have to face it squarely and valiantly. The next is the internal problem. The internal problem which is threatening the future of the Jewish people as a nation and as a religion. And that problem is intermarriage. That it's a problem and a tremendous challenge in the diaspora, I think everyone understands. 72.2% of the American Jews are intermarrying as I speak. And this excludes the Orthodox, for whom thankfully the intermarriage rate is extremely low, almost non-existent. But a very large percentage of Jews, especially young Jews, are not in any way affiliated with anything Jewish. In Europe, it's not 71.2%, but it's closer to 85%. And without an effective conversion, 90% of the products of these intermarriages don't even consider themselves to be of Jewish descent. So that's clearly a problem both sides in the diaspora. What about the state of Israel? Because what's happening in the state of Israel is a time bomb waiting to explode. The history of this time bomb begins after Perestroika, when Jews could leave the former Soviet Union. Thankfully, 1 million point approximately 100,000 came to live in Israel. And they came to live in Israel under the law of return, Chok HaShvut, which is one of the most fundamental rights of the state of Israel and glories of the state of Israel. Between 1939 and 1945, 6 million Jews were destroyed, decimated, cruelly, violently, by the Nazis, The major reason 6 million were destroyed was because there was no country ready, willing, and able to accept them. Not even Therefore, when the State of Israel was established, it was understood that one of the most important tasks of the Jewish state would be to take in any Jew who wants to come. No questions asked. Then comes the question, who is a Jew? We're the oldest and proudest people in the world on earth. But we still don't know how to define ourselves. Probably the greatest conundrum facing the Jewish people. And according to the Gemara in Kedushin, the Second Kedushin, page 68b, Daf Samachet Amud Bet, the Gemara says very clearly that a Jew is anyone born of a Jewish mother who has undergone a proper Orthodox conversion. Now, some 350,000 of the 1.1 citizens of the former, what was formerly Russia, the Soviet Empire, evil empire, some 350,000 did not qualify as Jewish under any of these two criteria. That means the overwhelming majority of them had perhaps Jewish fathers, but not Jewish mothers. There are another 100,000 in religious schools and non-religious schools, but Jewish schools here in Israel. This large number, now 450,000, live amongst us, consider themselves to be fully Jewish, but when it comes time for them to get married, they cannot get married in Israel because they are not halachically Jewish. So the question is, if we do nothing, there is soon going to be a Jewish society which will be divided between Israelis and Jews. Jews who are halachically Jewish and live in Israel, and Israelis who live in Israel but are not halachically Jewish. And that would be the worst thing possible, since they are living in our midst, and going to our schools, studying in our universities, part of our Jewish workforce. This would make life very difficult. And I add one more point. When one of these who are not halachically Jewish served in the IDF, and God forbid is killed in action, and then finds out, the family finds out, that he cannot be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And the headlines all over the newspapers. Widow, mother, my son, my husband, was Jew enough to give his life for Israel, and not Jew enough to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And the desecration of God's name is intense. So the question is, what do we do about it? Is there a solution? And how do we put it into practice? Now, the obvious solution is conversion. But first of all, the question is, does Judaism want converts? Is this something positive for us or negative for us? How do we act towards the convert? And do we expect the convert to convert to being an Israeli with the nationalistic aspect of being Jewish in the forefront? Or do we expect the convert to be totally religious? Now I know some would-be converts who were turned away because they didn't know, one particularly young woman, didn't know the blessed Al HaMichya by heart. I'm not going to ask them to see how many here know it. By heart, easily. But she was turned away. Is this valid or isn't it valid? What do we expect of a convert? Now my answer to my first question is Judaism definitely wants converts. The Midrash to Rabbi Yishmael says the reason why the Ten Commandments, the revelation at Sinai, was not given on the Temple Mount, but was given in the desert Galut, was because had it been given in the Temple Mount, then the Jews would have said the Torah belongs only to us. God wants the world ultimately to accept the Torah. That's why it was given in a no man's land, a wilderness, desert, which is also in every man's land. And there is an actual commandment, v'ahavtem et hager, you must love the convert, asking us to go so far as to begin loving the convert when he or she first expresses some kind of interest in becoming a convert. That's not generally the view of the religious courts all over the world. That love. But undoubtedly, the major view in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is a very positive one. Rabbi Akiva came from a family of converts. Rabbi Meir came from a family of converts. Onkelos, the most important translation of the Bible, was himself a convert. And the list goes on and on and on. Nevertheless, as I've said, there is a kind of feeling that we make it hard. There are countries like England where they expect people to study for 4 years before becoming converts. So we have to understand, what should we be expecting? What kind of conversion should we desire? The second issue that we must take into account, despite what I said a few moments ago, is that although it is absolutely true that matrilineal descent determines religion, the religion is determined by the mother, not by the father. Undoubtedly, there is a certain significance to DNA. And having a Jewish father should play a certain role. Harav Chaim Amsalem, formerly of Shas, and a very great Talmud Chacham, has written a 2-volume work called Zera Yisrael about those people who have patrilineal descent and what halacha says about them. I'll give you just 2 or 3 samples of what you can find in his very important halachic study. The Pnei Moshe, a great authority in the Jerusalem Talmud, he raises the possibility that if there is a child born to a Gentile mother and a Jewish father, whose circumcision comes out on Shabbat, perhaps it should be permissible to circumcise him on Shabbat. He quotes a verse, Mishpachotehem leveit avotam, in Bamidbar, that would seem to imply that the family follows the father, not the mother. There are more of Moshe Yisraelis. In the Darkei Moshe on Even Hoezer, Siman Kuf Nun Vav, brings an Or Zarua, who says that someone who has a Jewish father and not a Jewish mother is Jewish rabbinically, if not biblically. Fascinating possibility. And the Piskei Uziel says that if the Jewish father with a Gentile mother brings a child to a religious court, he must be converted. The child must be converted. Because he belongs to a category known as Zera Yisrael, the seed of Israel. A category for which we pray every morning in our prayers. Al Avotenu v'Aleinu, Al Baneinu v'Al Dorotenu, v'Al Kol Dorot Zera Yisrael Avadecha. A category of the seed of Israel. That is very important. Now, if someone comes from patrilineal descent, I am not suggesting that he does not need conversion. He does need conversion. According to everyone. Halacha l'maaseh. But what I am saying is, absolutely and clearly, he must be embraced. He must be brought close. And we must positively attempt to find any way to bring him back, because he is automatically part of the Jewish people, at least on one side, the paternal side. He has Jewish DNA. And that has to be taken into account. So he has to be converted, formally for sure, but with a lot of goodwill and with a lot of positive encouragement. Now I want to talk about the status of the ger, the status of the country. You must know that 36 times in the Bible we are told to love the country. And I want to contrast two individuals. Esther, Purim, just passed, who was a Jew from birth, but as I'll show you, I think, was moving a little bit outside until she was caught just in the nick of time by Mordechai. The contrast to her is Ruth, who came from the outside, a Moabite, and came into Judaism and became the mother of the Messiah. And I think we'll be able to get a measure of how the Bible looked at the convert in the way the Bible looks at Ruth in comparison to Esther. Let's look at Esther for a little while. Persia, Iran, conquered Babylon, Iraq. Countries sound familiar, don't they? Some 2,600 years ago, after Nebuchadnezzar the Babylonian, Iraqi, conquered Judea. Cyrus of Persia allowed the Jews to return to Judea. They returned, and they began to build the Second Temple. But only 15% of the Jews returned for economic reasons and for security reasons. And therefore, the little book of Esther gives us an amazing insight into how the Jews lived. It was a major Jewish community. How the Jews lived in this community in Persia, when they had the opportunity to go back to Israel, and they chose to stay in in Persia. What happens to them? What befalls them? So one thing that's interesting is that God's name doesn't appear at all within the Megillah. It opens with a very big party made by Ahasuerus. The party had much food and much drink, and no one was forced to eat, no one was forced to drink. But I didn't notice anyone saying, any of the commentaries, that there was a special OU corner, or even Rabbanut corner. And indeed, the Midrash says, why was this generation deserving to death? Because they enjoyed the great food of Ahasuerus' party. They were so happy to be invited to the king's party. Vashti dies. It's a beauty contest. I'm a little embarrassed to tell you. It was after I was married and I had to prepare my first lecture at Purim that I understood that it was a nocturnal Purim, a nocturnal beauty contest. A nighttime beauty contest, not a daytime one. I was shocked. That's not how I learned about it when I went to Yeshiva Klan. Esther was taken. It doesn't say she was forced. She was taken. She was massaged. She was prepared for the contest. No statement that she was kicking and screaming. The Gemara goes a step further. Sanhedrin Ayin Dalet. What she did with Ahasuerus was an issue of public knowledge. Perhaps she should have had herself killed rather than transgress, because that was a case of intermarriage. Certainly, a sexual Israelite with a Gentile. Is there the possibility that she wasn't too unhappy about the possibility that she may become queen, and that Mordechai wasn't too unhappy? That Mordechai perhaps went with her to Shushan when she went, because at that time it was an oligarchy that ran Shushan. The 7 Ro'ei Pnei HaMelech, who saw the face of the king, who were a kind of kitchen cabinet for the king, and made decisions. All decisions went through these 7 wise men, Yodei Itim, those who understood the times in which they lived, and were the advisory board. Probably Mordechai would have liked to be a member of that advisory board, understandably. And into this picture, because it isn't a picture of an assimilating community vying for power within the king's court, not too careful about kashrut. If they were careful, it was surreptitious, because certainly Esther didn't make an issue of it, and even Mordechai told her not to tell of her Jewish ancestry. And the Ibn Ezra brings one commentary who says, because had she told the king, he wouldn't have been interested in her, and Mordechai wanted the king to be interested in her. Perhaps to help the Jews, be. It's always good to have a Jewish person. AIPAC is very anxious to get Jewish people in Congress, and that's legitimate. But the price tag is you can't be too open a Jew, at least not in Persia. So it's a picture of a Jewish community in the throes of assimilation. Maybe economically and security-wise, they were better off in Persia. But assimilation was a very real danger. The jugular kind of danger. And then everything changes. Haman is elevated to an important position. And it's fascinating. He is above all of the other ministers. He was given supreme authority. And this government changed from an oligarchy to a totalitarian state. And here I want to tell you something which is the most important thing I'm going to say this year. Our Torah has a very important narrative. And that narrative, basically expressed by the relationship between God and Abraham, sets down the mission of Israel. Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. For E'escha l'goy gadol, I will make you a great nation. V'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adamah. Through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth. How will this blessing be? Genesis 18, verses 18 and 19. Ki dativ, because I have known, loved, and chosen Abraham, L'man asher yitzaveh et beito ve'et panav acharav, because he is commanding his household and his children after him, Lishmor derech Hashem, to observe the ways of the Lord, la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat, to do acts of compassionate righteousness and moral justice. Now, the most important principle of the Bible until this point is that God created the human being in his image, that every human being has a part of God within him. And therefore, every human being is free and inviolate and inviolable. Shofech dam ha'adam, anyone who sheds the blood of an innocent human being, ba'adam damo yishafech, by a human being shall his blood be shed. Because the human being is created in God's image. Now hear me very, very well. The world is divided and has been divided from earliest times. And when I say from earliest times, I mean from the pre-sophists, before Plato, until the postmodernists now, today. They're divided about what is the nature of the human being. Is the human being a complex animal? And if he's a complex animal, then what goes is the survival of the fittest. The most powerful survive, and the strong survive. And the strong has the right to manipulate and even destroy the weak. If a mosquito disturbs you, flick it out of life. If that that's the case with human beings, then might makes right to the victim of all the spoils. War is the ideal, so it was for Greco-Rome. Because war tested the mettle of people, divided between the powerful and the weak, between the brave and the cowardly. We Jewish people had a whole different view. Human beings created in God's image and is inviolate and inviolable. That's the Jewish view. An innocent human, no matter how weak he may be, dare not be compromised. Slavery is absolutely wrong. And taking away a person's freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, is a form of slavery. No human being can be a means to another human being's end. That's the Jewish message. And that's the message which we have to teach the world according to Abraham. Through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth. You must be certain, Abraham, your descendants must be certain, that the world will be dedicated not to might over right, but to right over might. Not to survival of the fittest and strongest and most powerful, the Ubermenschen, the Nazis, the communists who just mowed down 1 million mujiks like they were nothing, ISIS, who goes beheading. Iran does the same thing. The only difficulty between Iran and ISIS is who is going to be in control of the world through power. ISIS or Iran. Iran is doing exactly that with Yemen, putting Al-Qaeda in power. And that's why Abraham fought against the 4 terrorist kings, because they took human beings captive. Lot and many others. And that was Abraham's battle. And Abraham won it. And it was a battle for God. That's what Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, who was the king of which country? Which city? Jerusalem, the city of peace. Because we gave the idea of peace to the world. That's what Melchizedek understood. So what happened in Persia? What happened in Persia, all of a sudden, a regime that allowed for different ideas. It was the kitchen cabinet that discussed all these things. Became a totalitarian state in which one individual could subdue everybody else who was less powerful. That's why Mordechai lo yichra lo yishtachaveh wouldn't bow or bow down, prostrate himself. It was idolatry to do so. He knew the Jews could never function in such a situation. Because as Nietzsche said very well, the Jews who believe in human freedom and in the human being created in God's image will always seek to limit the power of the powerful who believe only in power. So Mordechai understood very well that the Jews couldn't live in any way under such a totalitarian regime. He refused to bow down or prostrate himself. It would have been idolatry for him to have done that. You know who today took a similar stand? He knew he would anger Haman, but he had no choice. Who took a similar stand? Nowadays, today, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you mean? Making it possible for Iran to go nuclear. Iran has already said that they are out to completely destroy, decimate Israel. Iran is still going after state after another state after another state with jihad power. Of course, Netanyahu accepted an invitation to go to the American Congress. Of course, he angered Obama. I honestly don't understand what's going through Obama's mind. But clearly, he had to do what he did. I was very proud of him. Because that's what it means to be a Jew. To stand up for compassionate righteousness and moral justice. And I want to say one more thing, which is a sideline. But I think a very important sideline. For me, the greatest tragedy that exists in Israel is that the rabbinate has become enmeshed in political parties. And therefore, there's no independent voice of compassionate righteousness and moral justice. I don't know how someone who has served a jail sentence for bribery, for mismanagement of funds, is put back in the very same place from which he did his crimes, never admitting sin, never asking apology. I don't understand it. Because you see, what we have to do as a nation is to teach the world, to bless the world by teaching the world compassionate righteousness and moral justice. The only way we can do it, because this is part of the Brit Bein HaBetarim, this is part of our national narrative and our national election. God has elected us to be his witnesses, to teach the world compassionate righteousness and moral justice. That's what we're all about. That was the covenant between the pieces. It's for that God chose Abraham and his descendants and said that he would give Abraham eternal seed. Now we have to have, therefore, a free voice that is not politically fettered and silenced. Therefore, what Netanyahu did, I'm very proud of him for and very thankful for. The fact that this is exceedingly difficult for the rabbinic establishment in Israel, I think is a tragedy. But let's go on. Because our narrative is to teach freedom, and the Exodus from Egypt was here for us to teach freedom. And Mordechai teaches Esther that she has to be willing to put her life on the line in order to make the Jews free and to silence Haman, who was in effect subjugating everyone in Persia to his will. Pesach, the Exodus from Egypt, Chag HaMatzot, teaches us that everyone must be existentially free. That's what it's all about. And therefore Mordechai magnificently says to Esther, I've got to now publicly speak out against Haman. We have to unmask ourselves. We have to do what Jews have always had to do in history, which is our mission as a nation. That's the Jewish nation. That's the covenant between the pieces. With that mission came commandment to circumcise, to shed blood if we have to, in order to keep the world free. And that's precisely what Benjamin Netanyahu tried to do before Congress. And he almost really succeeded, you know. He got 40 ovations. And he very much angered the President of the United States. And the President of the United States is lashing out at Israel. Just like Haman lashed out at all the Jews. And I'm not making a political statement.
I'm sorry, I can't listen to that.
That's okay. I'm trying to make a Jewish statement, which hurts me very, very, very much.
I think that's disrespectful to the President of the United States.
I ask for silence. I don't need help. I am being disrespectful to the President of the United States. He was disrespectful to my Prime Minister, to my country, and to my entire future, and to the future of the free world. Further, but what she managed to do, and managed to do very well, Esther, was to free her nation. She couldn't go beyond it. And that's why we don't say Hallel. Because she was still living in the diaspora. So that was as much as she could manage. That was really as much as she could do. Now, the one amazing thing about the Jews in Persia is that they remain Jews, and here we're talking about religion more than anything else. What did Haman say about the Jews? And why does he want them all killed? Because their dat, their religion, is different from everyone else's religion. Because they dared to be different. Because they dared to be free. Because they dared to insist that they have the right to think and act differently as long as they don't hurt anybody through their religion. And that's the Hebrew word which is used in the Megillah. So she saved the possibility of Jewish future, but only in Persia. And that was limited because another Haman could rise in the future, and that would be very problematic. And you know, she had one son. And I want to go back to an initial question which I asked. And that initial question was as follows. The initial question I asked was, what does it really mean to be a Jew? Or, who is really a Jew? And if I were to give an answer to that question, not a halachic answer, but a sociological and historical answer, I would say as follows. Who is really a Jew? He who will have Jewish grandchildren. That's a Jew historically. That's a Jew sociologically. Now Esther, in the diaspora of Persia, has a son. What's his name? Can anyone tell me? Darius. Was he a Jew? Biologically, yes. Was he a Jew historically, practically? He was one of the kings of Persia. He lived a Gentile life. We don't have her future progeny. That's why we don't say Hallel. Because you're limited in the diaspora with what kind of influence you can have. That's why God said to Abraham, I'll make you a great nation. Through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth. We're a nation. We have a right to say our piece. And we can influence. And we must influence. Okay. Now I'd like to move to Ruth. Ruth came from the outside and went into the inside. You know the first words that she says in her formula? What are those first words? Someone. Hey, yes. Let's hear it loud. Stand up.
Elokayach Elokai.
No. First word she says. Again? No. She does say, your nation shall be my nation and your God shall be my God to know me. She begins with your nation and then your God. But more importantly, she says, wherever you will go, I will go. Where is that? The land of Israel. And during the whole period of the First Commonwealth, there was no such thing as conversion outside of the land of Israel. It was national conversion in the deepest sense of the word. And it was understood that you have to be part of a nation, and that nation will not raise the specter of assimilation because everyone, or almost everyone, is Jewish. The culture will be Jewish. So there the Jewishness will be almost completely accepted and understood and continued. That was very important. So that was Ruth's fundamental acceptance of her Judaism alongside of Israel and Israeli nationality. Now you can be a Jew in the diaspora. You have to be religious. There are no other possibilities. Because if you're not completely religious, then you will become assimilated. And that's what we see with our very own eyes right now taking place with tremendous numbers. And I believe, by the way, that we can and must encourage conversion in the diaspora. But it has to be conversion with acceptance of the religion completely. With a very warm embrace, very user-friendly, but we have a tremendous opportunity, and we should see conversion not so much as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. And we'll get two for the price of one. Because I want you to understand that people who are into marrying are not religious Jews and religious Christians. They're lapsed Jews and lapsed Christians. And if we have the right kind of classes, lovingly, and teach it properly, I think we'll do very, very well. But undoubtedly, that's what we've got to do. And that becomes a tremendous challenge. It's not enough to say no. I think what we have to do is work very hard to show the beauty of Judaism and the beauty of Jewish life, and I think we can come way ahead. Very briefly, I want to come to Ruth. Ruth is the contrary to Esther. First of all, because she came from the outside, but she was warmly accepted. She's the contrary to Esther at another point as well. Esther had sexual liaisons with King Ahasuerus for the sake of helping the Jews, undoubtedly. And it was a mitzvah, but a mitzvah. But nevertheless, she did have a liaison. Interestingly, fascinatingly enough, as far as Ruth is concerned, that is not the situation. As far as Ruth is concerned, first she meets Boaz on the threshing floor. Nobody suggests that she had a sexual liaison and become impregnated, like the case of Ruth, of Tamar and Yehuda. That was nobody's suggestion. She not disclosed herself. That's not what Ruth chooses to do. She explains who she is. And she tells him she doesn't want a one-night stand. She wants to take the land that was owned by her dead husband. She wants to give her dead husband an heir, have a child with Boaz, who will inherit the land. She wants to live in Israel with progeny who will be Jewish and live on the Jewish homeland. And that's precisely what happens. And although Esther does not have Jewish progeny, Ruth is the grandmother of King David and the Messiah. So that clearly, Ruth from the outside, who goes as far as to come to live in Israel, the Jew from the outside who comes to Israel, the convert, trumps the Jew from the inside who stays in the diaspora. Certainly in terms of progeny. Certainly, if my definition was correct, who is a Jew, a person who has Jewish grandchildren, Ruth makes it more than estimated. I want to say one more thing. There's something very special about converts and conversion. Just like the Torah says that about tshuva, someone who, there's a BT and an FFB. FFB is from birth, and BT is about tshuva. In the place where penitents stand, the most righteous do not stand, because they have to overcome. There's a similar thing with a convert. Boaz clearly has a fancy for Ruth. All of this takes place in the frat, so it means a lot to me. And Boaz makes it very clear to give Ruth special favors. And Ruth says to him, "Why are you so nice to me? After all, I'm a Nochriah, I'm a stranger, I'm a Moabite." That's how some people look at converts, unfortunately. And Boaz says to her, amazingly, Boaz says to her, "I've seen the kindnesses you've done to your mother-in-law. How you left your parents and your homeland. And you've come to an unknown place that you didn't know anything about yesterday and the day before." Who is Boaz comparing Ruth to? Who? Abraham. To whom God said to Abraham, "Get thee forth from your parents' home. And go to the land that I will show you, the unknown land that I will show you." Every convert has the sanctity of Abraham. That's simple. And therefore has a very, very special place. No wonder 36 commandments to tell us to love the convert. I want to say one more thing. The convert proves something very beautiful. I was a rabbi at Lincoln Square for 19 years. I had a wonderful 19 years there. And it was a mecca for singles. Many, many, many marriages from all over America and even Europe. Very often people would call me up and they would say to me, "Do you know this one's parents? Tell us about them." They didn't ask me about the youngsters who had met each other. Sometimes someone from the boy was from Los Angeles and the girl was from Memphis. They didn't ask me about the person, but they asked me about the nature of the family. And I didn't know the family. I had a stock and trade response. And that response was, "You're asking the ichus, right? Ichus, family. I can only promise you the family of this boy or this girl is at a much higher level than the family of David HaMelech. King David, the Messiah." Who was the forebear of King David? And Ruth, a Moabite. And what does Moab mean? From the father. The sexual act between a father and a daughter. Sheina Mishpacha. 5 years. What does it mean? Why, for Christianity, the founder of Christianity, who they called the Messiah, didn't even have parents with a physical sexual relationship. And here, this is our picture of our Messiah. Strange, right? Let me tell you what it means, in my opinion. Really wish I heard from my Rabbi, from Rav Soloveitchik. An amazing idea. goes back to Lot. And the overturning of Sodom and Gomorrah through the terrible earthquake that must have taken place at that time. Remember, there was no Fox News. There was not even CNN. They thought that this was happening all over the world because that was their world and that this was the end of the world. And there's an amazing midrash that says the older sister said to the younger sister, we have to reestablish and replenish the world. This is it. There's no one else. There's us and our Father. I sleep with him tonight. You sleep with him tomorrow night. We'll have children and the world will be replenished. The younger sister said that's incest. That's disgusting. I don't want any part of it. And who has to replenish the world? Look at this world. God tried with Adam, it didn't work. Tried with Abraham. With Noah, it didn't work. Tried with Abraham, it didn't work. Forget the world. This is its end. The older sister said, remember, the human being was created in the image of God. The human being was created in the image of God, which means that he is redeemable and will be redeemed. He will redeem himself. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, and hear my words very clearly, belief in the Messiah is not so much a belief in God as it is in the belief in human nature and the ability of human nature to change, to develop, and to redeem itself. That's why Lot, and therefore Ruth the Moabite, had Zerah Yisrael, Jewish seed, going back to Lot. That's what the Midrash says. And it was very special. Very, very special. Because Lot's daughters ultimately believed in the redeemability of the human being created in the image of the divine. That's the basis of the coming of the Messiah. And that's the greatness of Ruth and her status as a convert. Because Judaism believes that ultimately, everyone will at least come to the realization of the compassionate righteousness and moral justice which Judaism is teaching. And that's the most important lesson for us living today. I'd like to conclude with a very beautiful story. Because what we're talking about is the enhanced status of the convert, and how, at the very least, we must look to welcome the convert with love and an embrace. There was a very famous convert who is known in all halachic literature as the Ger Tzedek, the righteous convert. He lived in Vilna. Graf Potocki, count, Polish count, who converted to Judaism in the 18th century and totally shocked the church in Poland, the Catholic Church. He knew they wouldn't let him live too long, and they imprisoned him. The Vilna Gaon, who generally never left the Beit Midrash, felt he had to visit this righteous convert. And he got permission to do so. And he went to visit him. And he found the Ger Tzedek weeping and terribly depressed. And the Vilna Gaon embraced him and said, "You are such a righteous person. You chose Judaism knowing very well that you might be killed for doing so. You have a marvelous place in heaven." "Perhaps," said the convert. "But understand, converted, so I no longer have parents. I never got married, so I don't have any children. And now I'm going to be killed without a past and without a future. It's as if I haven't lived at all. And the Vilna Gaon said to him, listen to me. There's a beautiful verse in Isaiah. We say it Rosh Hashanah in the prayers of kingship. Ani Rishon v'ani Achron. I am the first and I am the last, says God. And aside from me, there is no other God. Says the Midrash, I am first, I have no son. I am first, I have no father. I am last, I have no son. That's a Midrash against Christianity, Christian theology. Said the Vilna Gaon, I would explain it differently. For you, I am first for those who have no father, and I am last for those who have no son. Remember Abraham. He was willing to give up his father's house and to place his son's life on the line for God. So you have lived and you will live for all eternity. You have past, present, and future because you live together with God. The Vilna Gaon left in his will that he wishes to be buried next to this righteous convert. And he was. And those two graves still exist. They were not tampered with by the Nazis. I believe that what the Vilna Gaon was also saying was that there's a direct relationship between God and every convert. Because God is the consummate other. God is wholly other, kadosh, different, apart. And only those who can love God can also love the convert. And we are enjoined to love God. And so we are enjoined to love the convert. And perhaps deeply embedded in the mitzvah to love the convert is also the mitzvah to love God. Thank you very much.